Hey, what's up everyone? I hope you're all having a great day. Today, I want to talk about a topic that I think is relevant to many of us in the Overwatch competitive community, and perhaps relevant to many other games as well. And that is the question of, what do you do when you're hard stuck at a certain rank? What do you do when you start to feel like what you're currently doing isn't working and you're not making progress anymore? This is undoubtedly a challenge that all competitive players have faced in their journey to climb the ranks. I myself have faced this challenge many times where I've made great progress climbing from one rank to another, and then suddenly I was faced with what seemed like an unbreakable wall. I found myself no longer being able to win my games consistently enough in order to continue my climb. Being in such a situation can of course be very frustrating, as we play game after game in the hopes that we can reignite our progress and yet ultimately fail over and over again. Throughout my journey to GM on damage and support, I had to overcome plateaus multiple times, and I want to share some ideas about what I think might be helpful to players facing similar challenges. To be clear, I'm not going to be talking about any specific techniques or strategies about how to play Overwatch. Instead, I'm going to present ideas focused around your mindset as a player trying to improve. The first thing we should figure out is what exactly causes us to become hard stuck at a certain rank in the first place. Is it our team holding us back, or is there something we can really do about those crazy tank diffs, DPS diffs, and support diffs that we keep encountering in our games? Many players will tell you that no, it's all your fault and you shouldn't blame your team. But I'm going to take a different approach and tell you, yes, your team actually does hold you back, and here's why. Telling a player who wants to rank up that they simply need to get good is not particularly helpful, and it can even be quite condescending. It's akin to telling someone who asks you for advice on making more money, and your response is, well, first you have to know how to make more money. It's not technically incorrect, but as a piece of advice, it's functionally useless. Finding a problem difficult, even if one doesn't understand why it's difficult, is a legitimate experience and perspective that someone might have, and is of course not limited to Overwatch. Being told that you simply aren't good enough by people who don't have the same problem as you can lead to people feeling ignored and unheard. Again, a phenomenon not limited to Overwatch or video games. So yes, your team is the problem, but it's the problem that you're supposed to solve. You're not crazy when you feel like your teams are terrible. Your team holding you back is actually the point, and overcoming the fact that they're holding you back is the very challenge and achievement of ranked play. The reason you're hard stuck, put very simply, is that you haven't found a way to overcome the challenges of your average team in your current rank. For example, if you're a gold player who consistently finds themselves unable to win more than half the games with gold teammates, it can only mean that you aren't playing at a high enough level to allow you to rank up. The reason you were able to climb from the previous ranks is because your contribution to your teams were sufficient to make up for their mistakes. And so on average, you won more games than you lost due to probability theory. Of course, your average gold teammate will not be playing at a plat level, because if they were, they would be in plat, not in gold. It would be quite the paradox if your gold teammates were on average plat level, and you didn't need to carry your gold teammates in order to rank up. Why would your teammates be in gold if they played like plats? They would of course already be in plat. So the next obvious question would be, if my teams are just terrible, what's the solution? In short, the solution is what many people have said before, which is the typical use cover, position well, do more damage, hit your shots, don't waste cooldowns, use off angles, etc. But why is that the solution? Do I simply apply these rules like I'm casting a spell and suddenly my rank will go up? Maybe. Strictly speaking, you don't have to understand why a solution works in order to apply the solution. But not knowing why it works may lead to confusion when you think you're doing them correctly but you're not seeing the results. After all, my teammates don't do any of these things well, so how can I, by doing these things, possibly make up for 4 other players when I'm only one person in a team of 5? Intuitively, you might want to try informing your teammates of these issues. You might notice that your teammate is constantly out of position, so you'll try to correct them by politely letting them know to position better. You might also notice that your teammate isn't using their cooldowns well, and so you want to inform them that they should use them differently. Or you might notice that they're not competent on their hero, and so you tell them to switch. Our intuition tells us that this should work. After all, Overwatch is a team game, and we have to play as a team to win, and more wins equals a higher rank. But as we have all likely experienced, this doesn't work, and it doesn't work for a few reasons. The first reason is that if your teammates somehow knew how to correct their mistakes, they wouldn't be in your rank in the first place, and they wouldn't need you to tell them what to do. The fact that they make those mistakes is precisely why they're in the rank that they're in. The second reason is that your advice could possibly not even be correct. You could be a victim of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you don't know what you don't know, and so you overestimate your own analytical abilities. The third reason, perhaps more importantly, is that you would have made the mistake of assuming that your teammates are reasonable people who can be reasoned with. No matter how politely you say it, and even if you are correct, which may or may not be the case, trying to give advice in an online video game will almost always be interpreted as you trying to insult their very existence. They will probably proceed to do the exact opposite of what you said out of spite, or at best, they'll probably just ignore you. Stubbornness is again one reason they're in your rank, and not in a higher rank in the first place. So trying to reason with unreasonable teammates is often a waste of your own time. This is why my advice when it comes to communication is mostly none at all. Don't say anything, don't type anything, and your teammates will have less reasons to be angry. But the problem is if you can't control your teammates, how can you possibly make up for the fact that they suck? Counterintuitively, the way you make up for bad teams has nothing to do with making your team better. Instead, the key realization is that although your teams play terribly on average, the enemy teams also play just as poorly. And so, instead of trying to make up for bad teammates, which you can't do directly, you help your team by focusing on exploiting the enemy team's mistakes, more than they're able to exploit your team's mistakes. Using cover, having better position, and not wasting your cooldowns are important, but they're only one half of the equation. You should ask yourself if you're doing these things, but you should also ask yourself if you're successfully using these tools to take advantage of the fact that the enemy isn't. The two halves of the equation are related, so you might think that you're positioning well, but did your position actually allow you to exploit the fact that the enemy was out of position? If the answer is no, maybe your position wasn't as good as you thought. Or maybe your ability to take advantage of that position isn't good enough. That's why stats like damage and healing don't tell the full story, because they don't tell you if you're actually exploiting the enemy team's mistakes. Instead, if we want to focus on stats like eliminations and deaths do much better to approximate how well you're actually doing in your games. Sure, you might have 15,000 damage, but the fact that it took you 15,000 damage to get 10 eliminations is probably not a good sign, and it probably means that you were wasting most of your damage on targets that had no hope of dying. You might have 20,000 healing and the enemy team might only have 15,000, but the fact that you have 500 damage probably means that you never once pressured the enemies to take cover. Remember that healing is predicated on damage taken, and so if the enemy team doesn't take as much damage, they also don't need as much healing. Instead of damage and healing, your goals should be to end the game with the most eliminations on your team and also the fewest deaths. If you can accomplish both those things consistently, then you can be confident that you're actually carrying your games, and it is very likely that you will climb, regardless of the damage and healing numbers. And yes, this applies to supports as well, and it is the reason that certain heroes don't climb as easily as other ones. Sometimes you're not necessarily hard stuck, it's just that your hero choice limits the amount of impact that you can make, and therefore limits your win rate. Keep in mind that sometimes you'll still lose games if you're playing well. Ranked in team-based games can be a coin flip, and sometimes you're just going to have bad luck. But the important thing to remember is that the math checks out. Like in poker, which is a probability-based game, you won't win every hand, but if you trust the math, you can tilt the odds in your favor and win more than you lose over time. I'll leave the probability and statistics of ranked for a future video, but for now, just know that the teammates you get are like the cards you're dealt in a card game. Some hands will be good, and some hands will be bad, but the decisions you make consistently determine how often you win. Win or lose, if you consistently have high eliminations and low deaths, you can be more confident that you're on the right track. But how do you actually become the carry that you need to be in order to start finally winning more of your games? The first step is to recognize that the reason you're stuck in your rank is because of the way you're playing. So the simple answer is that you will need to change something about the way you play in order to start improving. Improvement is a word that implies some kind of change to a state, so change is necessary for improvement. The challenge is that change doesn't always imply improvement, so it's quite possible that you change something about your gameplay and yet see no improvement, or you might even see that you're performing worse than before. But it's important not to be scared of change just because you could fail. Failure is part of the process of discovery. And you should have the confidence that even if sometimes you don't figure it out right away, when you fail, you're actually left with more information than you had before. So now you can make a more informed decision next time about what to change. Players can often stay stuck at a specific rank for prolonged periods of time because they never gather the confidence to try something new, because they know if they try something new, they're probably going to end up losing some games. So they stick to trying their best, but their best is only ever as good as the rank they're already in. It can be hard to identify exactly what you need to do in an environment where you don't have perfect information. It's not like math where there are rules you can rely on to prove definitively that your answer is correct. It's more like a complex maze where you have to try different paths one at a time. You want to find which paths lead to dead ends so that you can eventually find the correct path via a process of elimination. You can be sure that what you're doing doesn't work if you continue to be hard stuck, and you can be sure that what you're doing is closer to what works if you start ranking up. So identifying what you need to do is actually done by identifying things that you shouldn't do, and this is essentially the scientific method being applied to improvement in games. Instead of seeing your rank as something intrinsically tied to your worth as a person, and therefore something to be anxious about, see it as a measurement of your continued experimentation. Ranked play is just a tool to guide your progress. So if change is the key to improvement, where do you start? The two broad skills in Overwatch are mechanics and game sense. Maybe your problem is mechanics, and maybe it's game sense, and it's probably a combination of both. An obvious strategy is to look at the people that have already solved the problem that you're trying to solve. There's plenty of educational content on Overwatch, and the advice given is often valuable, but remember not to just listen, but also to watch. What someone says they're doing doesn't always perfectly map to what they're actually doing, because describing things is hard, especially if the person you're watching is trying to describe what they're doing live in real time. In addition, how you interpret what somebody says might not be how they meant for you to interpret it, and there could be specifics that you're missing out on because they left it out or because you didn't fully understand it. When watching higher ranked players try to identify the differences between you and them, they might be taking different angles and they might be using their abilities differently than you are, and sometimes the answer is as simple as they're just hitting more shots. Once you've identified a difference, the next step is the age-old advice of practice makes perfect. Whether it's mechanics or game sense that you're trying to improve, practice is of course necessary to integrate what you've learned into your gameplay. Remember that improvement takes time, so don't be discouraged if something is hard, and instead be encouraged by the fact that something is challenging and therefore will be more rewarding once you eventually figure it out. There of course is no achievement without challenge. And especially don't let other people discourage you because you find something apparently more challenging than they did. We're all in different situations, and you may find certain things more challenging for one reason or another. Personal improvement is exactly what it means. It's personal, which means it's nobody's business but yours. So even though you can't control what other people say, don't let them stop you from enjoying your journey. Improvement should be a fun experience. And that's all I have to say for now. I hope you leave this video with increased confidence in yourself and your ability to learn new things. And perhaps the ideas I've shared aren't just limited to how you play games. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing and leaving a like and comment to support the channel. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful day.